giving both me and Paul a platform for some kind of artistic expression, and just the general belief that anyone should be able to access not just kind of creativity in making, but the act of putting something out into the world is a way of saying that you are here, right? That you exist. And so art became a very kind of clear way for Mum to advocate and champion people's personhood and agency.
Hi, you're listening to Conversations with Musicians with Leah Roseman, which I hope inspires you through the personal stories of a fascinating diversity of musical guests. I'm so happy to bring you this episode with the British Ivor nominated composer, violinist, and sound artist Ruby Colley. She grew up with her artist parents and her brother Paul, who is neurodivergent and non-speaking. This conversation shines a light on her beautiful album, Hello Halo, with the brilliant Exotti vocal ensemble. She composed this alongside her brother, transcribing Paul's sounds and using recordings of his voice to make a vocal map of his life and relationships. You'll be hearing music from this work as well as her project Overheard. Ruby spoke to me about the influence of Breton folk music and J.S. Bach and how she uses field recordings. You'll also hear about how she's collaborated in some of her audiovisual projects with her mother, the artist Kate Adams, who founded Project Artworks, a visual arts organization that collaborates with neurodiverse individuals and those with cognitive impairment and high support needs. We talked about navigating music education, stepping away from competitive environments, the joy of improvisation, and Ruby's upcoming project inspired by the beauty of swifts. You'll find the track information for the musical excerpts in the timestamps, and everything is linked in the show notes on my website. You can watch the video on my YouTube or listen to the podcast on your preferred platform, and I've also linked the transcript. It's a joy to bring these inspiring episodes to you, and I do all the many jobs of research, production, and publicity. Have a look at the show notes of this episode on my website, where you'll find all the links, including different ways to support this podcast and other episodes you'll enjoy. Hi, Ruby. Thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me.
I have so enjoyed discovering your music and creative work, and I listened the most to Hello Hello and also Overheard. So I'm hoping we can do a deep dive into both those projects and your creative life. So the Exotti ensemble, this chamber choir, did you know their work before?
Yeah, I was aware of them, but I wasn't aware of just the full scope of what they worked with. And they were recommended to me when I was kind of first R&Ding this idea. I was looking for a very specific vocal ensemble who would give this project the kind of fearless kind of respect that I felt it needed. And so they came recommended, and they absolutely kind of, met the day with that one.
Yeah, I really, really love the album. I've listened to it many times. I find it's beautiful and inspiring and moving, and kind of it's fun. It's definitely fun. So I was hoping we'll be able to highlight several tracks. Although, if you want to talk about every single track, we can have little clips, and I can intersperse that with our conversation as well. So it's up to you. But I selected a few that
take it as it comes.
Okay. So this was developed alongside your brother Paul, who is neurodivergent and is non-speaking. So do you want to first speak to us about his rich repertoire of sounds and gestures and how that works?
Yeah, as you mentioned, he's non-speaking, but he does have a kind of a toolkit of words. I guess they're kind of limited, so he will use certain words for multiple contexts. So context is everything with Paul. And also how he says certain things. So the main kind of hook of this project, Hello Halo, is that his main totem word is hello. So how he says it and to whom has a lot of kind of contextual meaning. And so it can be whispered, it can be shouted, it can have a kind of genial upward inflection, and that all has its own meaning. Over the years, you get to know Paul intimately, and you get to know all of these different words with their context, so you can understand what he means. And I wanted to give that its full colour in the form of music.
So I'll play an excerpt of the very first track, which is Hello, Halo.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Oh.
And I'm curious, with you and your mom and his carers and his friends, have you discussed over the years the meanings that you each interpret from his various vocalizations?
Yeah. So, well, for example, just the other day, one of his support workers was leaving, and he kind of leaned over and he said hello to her. And we immediately knew that meant he meant goodbye. But, you know, he has his toolkit, and that's what he's got to use. And so in that context, we all agreed that that's actually what he meant because of the way he said it and the context.
I really enjoyed watching the beautiful documentary film you made about this. So I'll link that on YouTube for people in the show notes. And there was that scene where I think he's listening for the first time to some of the music with the singers. Maybe not the first time, but a time and it was so beautiful seeing that.
That was the first time.
Okay. That he was so enthusiastic and on board with it.
Absolutely. It was just a very clear moment of recognition, I think. And that's why I wanted to play it to him, because, you know, a lot of the process was about involving him as much as possible. Also having his consensual involvement as well. I'm really glad that he got to be part of that and really understand what it was about.
Yeah. So he used to have more words and that he's lost with aging, and I gather that's kind of common.
Right. I mean, I don't think he had more words. It's just he had different words, I guess. And one of our personal theories is that simply there's only so much information that he can hold. And sometimes if certain words become superfluous, then they will get lost. You know, it's a kind of use it or lose it situation. And there's a lot of words that he no longer uses. And so, one of the movements is dedicated to those lost words. One of those words was the word hup. So it was like up, but with an H. And he, as a boy, was very kind of transfixed with the sky and the stars. And so he would use that word to bring attention to the sky. But within that would be birds, stars, and other meanings as well. So he would use that word again in different contexts. And so one day he started singing Twinkle Twinkle in the back of the car, but with the word hup. And, you know, we're all pretty floored because it was pitch perfect, like a choir boy. And so I brought that into this movement as a kind of quotation.
Which movement is that?
Echoes.
Yeah, I was also wondering about the track Cosmology, where they're reciting the letters.
Mm. Right. So that movement is a little bit more kind of cerebral in the sense that it's specifically inspired from a drawing that my mum did called The Cosmology of Care.
Oh, I saw that.
Okay. Yeah, so they're all the acronyms for the systems of care within the UK. And as a caregiver, you get to know all of these systems a lot, and they all get reduced to their acronyms, which can be quite overwhelming sometimes because there's a lot of them. So I started to kind of list them all from this drawing that my mum had done. And, I thought this could be rhythmic, this could turn into something. And I deliberately started from a place of spatial kind of introduction to the letters, but then for it to kind of gain momentum and fall into a bit of chaos as, more and more acronyms are introduced, until it eventually just gives way to the other things within the cosmology drawing that give a person's life meaning beyond these bureaucratic systems, which is, choice of who to spend time with, being close to the sea, being in wild spaces, things
So
like
that's
that.
on your Instagram. That's where I saw it. Yeah, I found it very moving. I was going to ask about that if you'd drawn it. If you'd like in the show notes, I could put that image if your mom would be interested, because it's very meaningful.
Absolutely, yeah, you're very welcome to. Yeah.
Yes.
I can send it to you if you need to.
Yeah, so so it's this beautiful graphic with circles, and I think some of it's definitely for everybody, this quality of life. So if you want to speak to that a little bit more, it's so meaningful.
Yeah, and I think this is what points to the overarching meaning of the entire work, is that it's meant to fly the flag for his humanity, and his the breadth and depth of his personhood. And that's what this cosmology drawing points towards as well, that these are all things that we as humans all need in our lives to live fulfilling, meaningful existences,
HC, DST, DWP, PHB, CHC, DST, PHB, CHC, DST, PHB, CHC, DST, PHB.
Did you experience some negative attention when you were growing up as a sibling?
For certain, yeah. And it was the 80s. It was like a different time. And there was a lot of unwelcome visibility, I guess. And I found that quite painful. And I also understood, my brother in a more non-verbal way anyway. As siblings, we had an energetic connection, I guess, that wasn't typical of siblings. So I think as an adult, I wanted to be able to have that visible, but, in a way that had more agency and self-determination,
And I was curious about the notation for the singers. Were you using traditional notation, or were there some different?
Yeah, mostly. That took some time to develop, and I worked with a scoring assistant to help develop that, because there were a lot of kind of sounds that I needed to be kind of quite exacting, so we developed a key for a lot of the performance markers within the score. And we spent some time at a residency to work over those. And, honestly, Exaudi was so exemplary at, just immediately understanding the score anyway. It really didn't take too much time. But there's certain sounds that required a little bit more kind of graphic interpretation. And two of the movements, the duets, were a little bit more open in those terms.
Ooh. George.
In many of your other works, and we'll get into it, you do use field recordings, ambient nature sounds particularly. And I was curious if you know the composer Karen Power.
I do, yeah. I love Karen Power's work.
Okay. Yeah, I had her on the podcast last year, and I was curious if you made that connection.
Wow. Oh, okay. That's awesome. I haven't seen that, but I'd love to look that up and watch it.
So this album was nominated for an Ivor Novello Award, which is the UK is a great honor, for the best choral composition. And getting that nomination, has that helped with visibility, getting more people to listen to it?
I think it becomes a calling card and, a kind of flag of legitimacy, I guess. I mean, I don't know if other composers feel this, but I'm always kind of questioning my validity as a musician all the time. The self-doubt abounds all the time, so having those little moments of recognition means everything, really. And it was real honor to be nominated.
And the documentary has it been in film festivals? Are you going that route with it?
Right. So it recently showed at a conference called Classical Next in Budapest. And that sat alongside some beautiful films, including films from the LSO, the London Symphony Orchestra, and it specifically focused on inclusion in classical music. So I showcased the film there and got to represent the project as a whole.
Wonderful. Just in that film, which I encourage people to see, it's not that long. It's about 15 minutes, if I remember?
Yeah, max. Yeah, 13 to 15 minutes.
So you highlight Paul's creativity and photography and painting through his support artists. So this kind of creative expression, did that come early, like in your family, that you knew this and you were able to help him?
Well, both my parents are artists, and the studio that you see Paul in is part of a wider organisation called Project Artworks, which is the organisation that my mother founded. And so the organisation was founded on the back of, both my parents being artists and both of them giving both me and Paul a platform for some kind of artistic expression, and just the general belief that anyone should be able to access not just kind of creativity in making, but I think the act of putting something out into the world is a way of saying that you are here, right? That you exist. And so art became a very kind of clear way for Mum to advocate and champion people's personhood and agency through art. And so I guess the philosophy of approach is to essentially allow or bring about the circumstances and environment where people have the opportunity to express themselves on their own terms, rather than being kind of herded or managed in any kind of creative ways. And because we know Paul very intimately, we know that he loves people and that he loves studying faces. So the photography came about that, and his support artists, Georgia in particular, really helped develop his, practice through, having all of these inclusive means of him to photograph people.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. I was also wondering, I have a special interest in sign language, and I was curious if some of his gestures are British Sign Language or if they're all just his own gestures.
Some of it will be makaton. So makaton is an accessible form of sign language here in the UK. It's kind of like a simplified BSL. Yeah, just in terms of the fine motor skills, it's less complex. So people who struggle with fine motor skills, like my brother, can access it a bit more. So he has very particular signs like plane. And so sometimes he'll just kind of approximate the gesture, but he'll lift his hand, and we'll know what that means. And and he'll use this sign a lot, which is friends. But again, like his words, it'll have multiple meanings and contexts, so he'll use this a lot.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting, because that relates to married in ASL, in the American Sign Language, which we use here in Canada. It's always interesting.
Yeah. A lot of the signs are really intuitive and make complete sense, right?
Yeah. So have you connected to other families through this project with similar...
Yeah. That was one of, the reasons why I wanted to make it, is to reach, other people who have non-speaking family members, because it's such a particular way of being in a family, to have someone who's never spoken a full sentence to you in their whole lives. It's profound, and I know that it's a particular experience that other people with non-speaking family members will immediately understand. And so with the premieres, I did a lot of kind of audience development and outreach to let those people know about it, and we had a lot of people come, and it was really moving, like ridiculously moving at times, because I got to hear a lot of these people's stories. There was a particular woman who also had a brother called Paul, and she came and spoke to me after the show, and it was just so wonderful hearing everyone's different but the same experience, basically. And everyone, their family member, all has their own unique means of communication. It's a little kind of microcosm of connection within these, small spaces that, I just, feel like there's another project in that.
So I was curious about your interest in filmmaking, because for your previous album, Overheard, you also made some film. So,
Right. I mean, to clarify, the Hello Halo documentary was made by Rod Morris, and he did a fantastic job. But I made, for the album Overheard, I made The Sea Wrote It, and I worked with my mother on that as well. She kind of came along with me and did some filming with me, and I also made audiovisual work called Edgeland to accompany the album, which became its own audiovisual installation. And I feel like the way I compose is kind of like a film without any visuals. Like, that's how I think about when I'm composing. It's so time and place specific in my mind that I just automatically want to give the music some visual representation. It just feels very instinctive to me.
Ruby, on your YouTube, like, you have Paul's Garden, which is part of Edgeland. Like, there's excerpts.
Right.
So I really enjoyed watching those. They're really beautiful and evocative.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, those 4 little mini films, I guess, are like a audiovisual map of this particular area near our home, which is an edgeland, which is the intersection between urban and rural spaces. So this particular edgeland sits between an industrial, estate, houses, and the sea. And what separates it is a railway line. And what interested me is I wanted to trace a journey from my brother's home, which happened to be right by the railway line because he loves trains. So perfect home for him. Through the train shed, where there's a lot of nature as well, birds roost there, across the bridge, which is literally the bridge that between these intersectional spaces to the beach and the walkway. And so they all have their own visual and sound placeholders, basically, within the work.
Mm-hmm. So some of this was a pandemic lockdown project in terms of like your garden, and I was thinking about that intimacy of a place, getting to know a place so well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. So Springs Eternal was born from me, field recording in my own garden at dawn in the spring, just before the first major lockdown. Yeah, obviously one's limited by where you can go. I don't know whether you had this in the US, but something that was a kind of a universal experience when I ask audiences this in shows about this particular time is that when lockdown happened, all the birds suddenly got really loud. And I just assumed it was because we could hear them better, because we had all got out of their way. But I since found out, I read that scientists had been studying this, and because of the industrial hum that, human activity produces, like, cars, factories, we're really noisy. In order for birds to communicate with one another, they would have to raise the range of their bird song in order to lift above that industrial white noise, essentially. Which is essentially like asking a soprano or a mezzo to sing soprano, which is not natural or comfortable for their range. So when we essentially kind of went inside and went quiet and got out of their way, they were able to sing at a range that was more natural to them and therefore louder.
That's very interesting. I mean, this came up with the media scholar Mac Haygood. Actually, we were talking about the bird song. To be clear, I'm not in the US. I'm a Canadian. I'm in Ottawa, Canada.
Oh,
that's okay. But we had, nature. I remember seeing animals I never normally saw in the city.
Yeah. That happened, didn't it? And it's just extraordinary to think of that now. And so inadvertently, Springs Eternal became a record of that time, of that moment in time where these birds just got crazy loud. And we don't know if we'll hear that again,
So I'll be editing in some clips from this beautiful album, Overheard, and it will be linked in the show notes for people to check out the whole thing. So you have these wonderful collaborators. Do you want to talk about the other musicians?
Yeah, for sure. So I got to work with some really wonderful people. Lucy Mulgan on bass and Frank Moon on oud in some tracks. And myself on all the violins. A lot of those pieces were the more kind of folk-leaning compositions, the more structured ones were developed, socially distanced in a kind of a warehouse space or a studio space in the middle of January, I think, or like winter. It wasn't warm time. I can't. So we were all kind of like multi-layered kind of thing, a couple of the works I knew what I wanted to do, and then some of them were really unformed as well. So I just had textural ideas that I wanted to try out, and we kind of jammed it out a little bit, and then I recorded it, and then I would take it home and formulate it into a structured composition. And then the other pieces were developed in a residency where I had a very particular idea of what I wanted to do, and they were born out of those field recordings specifically. And they were more kind of like structured kind of soundscapes where I then built the instrumentation around the sounds.
Can you tell us more about that residency? Hi, please take this mini pause to hear about some other episodes I've linked directly to this one, which I think may interest you, with Karen Power, Galen Lee, Ian Brennan, Mac Haygood, Mark Groudon, and Tegan Farron. In the show notes, you'll also find a link to sign up for my newsletter where you'll get exclusive information about upcoming guests, a link for my Ko-fi page to support this project directly, where you can buy me one coffee or every month, and my podcast merchandise store with the design commission from artist Steffi Kelly. You can also review this podcast, share it with your friends, and follow on your podcast app, YouTube, and social media. All this does help. Thanks. Now, back to my conversation with Ruby.
Yeah, so that was developed at Breton Piers, at the same place where I did Hello Halo as well. And yeah, I spent a week there where I just went out into the field and recorded. Specifically, I was looking for sounds that, natural sounds that intersected with human structure or human interference, I guess, because one of the things of being in the British Isles, it's a small island and there aren't many wild spaces left. So the most common thing is when you're out field recording, trying to record nature, is that you inevitably record human interference in some form, like aeroplanes, cars, boats, and so I thought, rather than trying to eradicate that, I'll lean into it and give it the kind of honest retrospection that it needs, to kind of fully document the place where we are now through the lens of the climate crisis, is that we are human beings really shrouding nature in every aspect, and especially, in this context through sound. So we have boat masts in the wind, we have rain on a thatch roof of a church, we have lockdown gardens, and it's more kind of, zoning into those details and those intersections through sound, basically.
I was curious, in terms of live performances, you do like a solo version with electronics without, because you recorded some tracks with other musicians, but you do different versions?
For sure, yeah. So, I guess the touring reality these days is that, you will need multiple versions of your work, because touring with a full band is not cheap. But also that's a lot of how the work was developed anyway in its first instance, was, solo. So it's nice to rethink those works as, electronics and multi-layered kind of effects, and weaving in the field recordings within that, and it becomes its own thing, but it's still very much tied to how the album sounds. And then, when I get to take the quartet out on the road, it becomes a whole other experience as well.
It was strange, like the first time I heard you, because I'm a violinist and I do some improvisation, and it was like very much my language of improvisation. It was almost like hearing a little bit a cousin player being reflected back. It's cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I hear other violinists who improvise as well, I feel the same way. I was like, oh yeah, like I recognize that as a language in on itself,
So your first love was Bach?
Yeah. Although I guess I wasn't conscious of that as a kid, but my dad would play the solo cello suites and the violin partitas and sonatas a lot in the house. So it was just like going in, and I think I was a Suzuki kid as well. So I think before I could learn how to read music, I was kind of learning those by ear. And I think inadvertently I kind of created a mishmash between the sarabande and the chaconne, like without meaning to, and I think it's just his voicing and the way he threads motifs, and with his fugues, for example, it's definitely had an influence in how I compose.
And in terms of your folk, like the folk influences in your music, did that come from any kind of active involvement in folk scene?
Yeah, so I spent 7 years living in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and obviously the folk scene there is incredibly vibrant, and but rather than just simply kind of learning the Irish traditional tunes, they also had some brilliant festivals where they had musicians from all over Europe and America come to play, and it was there that I actually really got into Breton music, and it just, when you speak of like that sense of familiarity, when I heard Breton playing a special fiddle playing, I was just like, this feels so familiar to me. Like I absolutely adore it. For me, it sounds like a perfect mix between Renaissance court music and more Eastern European folk, that has those, wonky time signatures of sevens and nines and fives, and
And in terms of your music education, was it pretty traditional classical for most of it?
Probably not. I mean, I wove in and out of the canon, I guess. So Suzuki method when I was a kid was not necessarily considered the way you learn. But yeah, I did that for a long time, and then I went to the conservatoires as a teenager, the Royal Academy of Music, on weekends. And then rather than continuing that into my degree, I decided to go to Dartington College of Arts, which is, the more kind of contemporary, experimental end of the stick. And that's where I started to explore improvisation, but also audiovisual installation and, cross-media.
What was that college experience like in terms of the people you met and mentors?
Oh, absolutely amazing. Like some of the happiest times of my life. My tutors were wonderful. One of my composition tutors was Frank Denier, a lovely man called Bob Gilmore, who's no longer with us. He was a musicologist. It was an opportunity to, I think being there was one of those experiences of knowing that I really belonged there, which is not a common feeling I'd had up until that point. It felt like I'd found a home.
And did you find when you were a teenager and you're going to the conservatoire that there was this competitive atmosphere?
Yeah. Yeah, really. And I didn't know what to do with that, actually. I think, I remember watching the other students really kind of jump into that, the competitiveness, and it wasn't in my bones to do that. And so I struggled to know how to place myself within that environment if I wasn't kind of scrambling with all the others, and yeah, I would often get told off for playing that wasn't on the page. But it was still a really formative time, and I had a violin tutor who really tightened up the nuts and bolts of my technique, which has lasted me till today, so I'm forever grateful for that. And the opportunity to play in chamber groups and orchestras, there's nothing like that as an experience. So yeah.
And in terms of I was just curious, you talked a little bit about growing up with parents who are artists, but what do you think you gained from that?
A kind of a symbiotic approach to music making, I guess. Yeah. The boundaries between art, music, film, sound, drawing, painting, they're pretty blurred for me. And
in another interview, you had talked about growing up undiagnosed neurodivergent. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Yeah.
How did that affect you, and how has it changed as an adult to understand yourself better?
Oh, yeah. I understand myself far better now. And I think that is the main argument for diagnosis, I think, is giving yourself a framework of understanding, that's been affirming more than anything else, and not feeling like you're somehow doing life or music wrong, but I am simply trying to find a way to work with it in a way that worked for me, and so yeah. And now I'm at a place where I can kind of forgive past Ruby for a lot of mistakes and things like that, and I have built into my life a robust framework to support myself and to know what I'm good at, and to really lean into those things, and to know what I find more challenging, and to know that's the area that I'll get some support with, or not do that thing.
That's great. And in terms of becoming a parent and navigating a music career as a mum, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. God, it's an ever-evolving picture. I would say in the early days it was extraordinarily hard, but it also, becoming a mum, for me anyway, it was the spark that lit a fire under my butt. Like, I feel like the process of growing and birthing a human really kind of ignited a level of creativity in me that I didn't know I had before, and it ignited an urgency with that as well. It felt really urgent. If I don't do this now, then I'll die. And so that's what's motivated me through the other elements, which are very challenging. And I think the main challenging elements of it is that motherhood is not adequately supported within the music industry, within society generally, I would say. So yeah, that's what helps me withstand those bits, is this huge amount of galvanization that got woken up in me.
In terms of interdisciplinary projects, do you think that can help broaden audiences for music and for art too?
Yeah, absolutely. You can get access to a whole new set of audience members through doing that. I think there is a broader kind of movement of involving cross-disciplinary and kind of approaches to concerts these days. I'm going to get really deep now, but it feels like a kind of evolving instinct within people, you know, with certain cultural movements that happen over the decades. I feel like we're in one of those at the moment where it feels really widely understood that that's what needs to happen. You know, like the minimalist movement in the 60s, you know, it feels like one of those kind of times where the cross collaboration and the understanding that we're not separate as artists, but we're also not separate as humans. And so bringing each other together in these forms of expression and connection feels really necessary at this time.
You know, I'm a big fan, but not... I know many colleagues, certainly in the classical music world, who don't feel that way, that they want things to stand on their own in a traditional way.
For sure. And, you know, that will always be there. You know, it's not as if this current, you know, moment that's happening replaces that. I think it's just finding additional ways to reimagine how we do this as classical musicians. That's the very nature of what art is. You know, it's evolve or die. And without it, I think, you know, it ceases to be what its original intention was, which is to be a holding place for what it is to be human. And they must reflect the times, and the times we're living through at the moment are pretty hardcore.
So I was curious about next creative projects. Do you have things you're working on right now?
I do, yeah. I'm at the foothills of a couple of ideas. One's a major project that sits by itself, and then there's another particular piece of work that's very specifically about swifts. And they're an endangered bird, and they're virtually disappearing from the UK. It focuses more very particularly about the swifts that come to my home, which seems really egocentric when I say it out loud, but they're an extraordinary ancient bird, and they travel thousands of miles each year to Africa and back. And a lot of them, when they first fledge, they spend up to 4 years in the air without ever touching ground, which is insane. So when they first come to nest, that will be the first time that their feet have touched anything solid in years. All in the small hole of my house, you know. So a lot of the things that I like to work with conceptually is the intersection between the macro and the micro, and swifts embody that, I think, perfectly. This huge macro existence with, you know, time and space, and finding their way to this tiny little space in my home.
So are they eating flying insects?
Right. Yeah, and they sleep on the wing as well. So they shut down one half of their brain, and then they switch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. On our walk this morning, like, I live in an urban area, but we have access to a lot of nature. So there's a river very close by, and there was a large snapping turtle by the path, which in 30 years walking on this path, I've never seen a turtle there. They must live there, but I was just amazed because they're such ancient, like you mentioned about these old birds, but I mean, I thought they were here millions of years before we were.
Right.
And it's very, when you think of it that way.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And,
yeah.
You know, I was recording them, and when you slow a swift scream down, because they scream, and they used to be known as devil birds. Oh. And a bad omen, but now they obviously signify something else. When you slow it down, it sounds like a dinosaur, you know, and they are dinosaurs, you know, they're ancient. So, yeah, that's going in there.
And do you teach violin?
I do, yeah.
And I'm sure your approach is very wide with different students. I have a feeling you don't do the same thing for everybody.
No, I mean, I'll have a rough framework that I will weave in there, but it is very person-centred, and it will collate all the good bits, hopefully, that I've gathered over the years. Ironically, I'm a stickler for technique, but I try and do it in a way that's not dry and makes you want to give up entirely. It's weird. I've been teaching for about 20 years now, and it's only in the past 5 years that I really feel like I've got good at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've been teaching for over 30 years,
right.
And it's interesting. I mean, I often ask people how their teaching has changed or how it's different from the way they were taught. But I do recognize we're always evolving, and maybe you don't really remember how it was 20 years ago. Mm. But it is a challenge with violin. I mean, every instrument is technical, of course, but it is hard. It's very hard to play in tune and hold in a comfortable way and all the things. So
that initial learning curve is the steepest one, right? And getting people or adults especially, but yeah, any learner to keep the faith through that particular bit is hard.
Do you ever improvise with your students?
I do. If we get to a place where that feels natural, like they're wanting to do that, some pupils will be wanting to have a framework and a goal to work towards, and then others will be like I was and wanting to kind of go off piste a bit. So again, it's very person-centered to what they naturally are inclined to do as musicians.
Okay, well, thanks so much for this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. Keep in mind, I've also linked directly several episodes you'll find interesting in the show notes of this one. Please do share this with your friends and check out episodes you may have missed at leahroseman.com. If you could buy me a coffee to support this series, that would be wonderful. I'm an independent podcaster, and I really do need the help of my listeners. All the links are in the show notes. The podcast theme music was written by Nick Cold. Have a wonderful week.